And so if you paid attention to the Olympics, it ended in an amazing, well-known, probably going to be remembered for a long time way. There was a Sunday morning, I don't remember the date exactly, but it was February. And if you were at church, you remember people talking about it. If you went online later, you definitely saw something about it. But the U.S. hockey team, for the first time in 46 years, defeated a little country up above us, Canada, in a hockey game. Yeah, boo them. Woo, USA, 250. Here we go. But, yeah, I don't know why I said that. But we beat Canada in a hockey game. Like, that's unheard of. So unheard of that the last time U.S. won gold in the Olympics 46 years ago, they made a movie about it called Miracle. Like Miracle on Ice. If you've never seen that movie, I encourage you to watch it on Disney+. Great movie. But this is a big deal. And if you watch or you kept up or you've just been anywhere not under a rock, you've seen this picture of one man named Jack Hughes. Everybody give it up, Jack, America's hero. Jack, yeah, I love that picture. Love that guy. But Jack is the guy who made the winning goal. It was in overtime. It was a great game. I didn't watch the whole game. I just saw the overtime portion. But he made the winning goal. At some point in the game, he also got a chipped tooth. That's what makes that picture so cool. But at one point in the game, he scores the winning goal. His name is Jack Hughes again. He's now the focal point of American hockey. He's now the guy that everybody knows the name of. If you didn't know the name of, now we're talking about it on a random Wednesday night where we're mentioning him in a sermon. It's a big deal. It was a heroic moment, not just for him and his family, but for the country. Why do I bring that up? Because Jack is not the only Hughes on the team. He has a brother. So that family knows what they're doing apparently. But he has a brother, actually an older brother. Actually, if you were to ask NHL fans, his brother is better. His brother is a more decorated skater and hockey player. I didn't know this before the Olympics, by the way. I'm not this hockey fan. I don't want to pretend to be, but I just have heard about it afterwards. But his brother, the guy that plays for the Vancouver Canucks and the other team, I know the Canucks, I don't know the other team. But his brother is better. His brother, for all their life, or all their career, has been in the spotlight. And now all of a sudden, Jack swoops in, figuratively and literally, swoops in and scores the winning goal. Is now a household name in America. And so if you're Quinn, you're like probably having an emotional reaction to that. You're probably like, what the heck? Like, I'm the better skater. I'm the better hockey player. I've worked my whole life way harder than Jack has. I have more awards. I have more accomplishments. Now Jack is getting all the glory and attention. And I want you to think about it. If you were Quinn, how would you react to that? Well, people wondered that, actually. And they asked Quinn, how would you describe Jack and his performance in the gold medal game? And he said one word: hero. He took this opportunity not to defame his brother, not to elevate his career and say, hey, yeah, he just got lucky. Or yeah, it was because of this assist and all the other hockey terms that you can make up. No. Quinn took this opportunity to elevate his brother. Why I bring that up is because if Quinn did the opposite, if Quinn dragged him or talked about how he wished it was him or all these different comparison thoughts, we would understand what that feels like. We would understand of that's not fair. We would understand of this thought of why wasn't that me? Or why not someone else? Why did it have to be my brother? Like, I wanted to win. I didn't care if it was me, but my brother? Like, we know these feelings. In fact, there is a survey done that says 83% of adults, so I know that's not you, I'll get to the point in a second, 83% of adults know the feeling of comparison or unfair treatment, whether it's at home, among friends, at work, on teams, in school, in relationships in general. That 83% of adults, I would argue that's probably a little more, that's 8 out of 10 people know this feeling of this is unfair. And I would argue, I would be willing to bet that at some point in their life, that unfairness happened when they were in middle school and high school. That life seems unfair. Maybe you don't want to say the word unfair. Maybe you see yourself as being burned out or in a toxic environment, or that you're having a weighty situation, or life is just draining, or everyone is out to get you, or life is just a lot. Like, we know these feelings. Life seems unfair. But the truth of this series, the truth of this verses is that you can feel sometimes the reality of unfairness. We can feel and begin to cope that if there was a God, it would be easier to cope with this if there wasn't a God. Because as we've talked about, if God is so good, if God is so attentive to every detail, if God is so intentional to care for me, why do these bad things actually happen to me? Like, this conversation, this thought, these questions can come natural. Like, if all these things are made with purpose and intention, Why do bad things still happen to me? Doesn't God control that? Doesn't God care? Like, why are these things happening to me? Isn't He trustworthy? Isn't He in control? Again, it can maybe sometimes be easier to answer that question if you didn't believe in a God. But I would argue, just like I said from the very beginning of this series, that these questions are not supposed to be not asked by Christians. You can ask these questions. You can have the feeling of these thoughts. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying you shouldn't stay there. That shouldn't be the end result. That shouldn't be your emotion about everything. And what we're going to talk about tonight is I want to give you the answer now. I don't want to try to pinpoint or try to elude you and say, I have this magic solution to how you can overcome comparison and anger and jealousy. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is this. When life feels unfair, our expectations should be not on what we think we deserve, but on what God is actually deserving of. Or as I said it like this, Houston, if you could go to the next slide, that life feels unfair when our expectations of what we deserve outweigh our awareness of what God deserves. That our life feels the most unfair when we only focus on what we feel like we do deserve and not what God actually deserves. And that feeling, we don't have to imagine what that's like. Sometimes it's engraved into our nature, not because God has designed that in us, it's because of a consequence of sin. And that's the first point I want us to see tonight. The consequences of sin is comparison. This is not the only consequence of sin, but this is a consequence of sin. Is that there is comparison now in the world. Genesis 4 is more than just a story about two brothers, one getting super jealous and killing the other. Genesis 4 is a description, is a glimpse of what's actually going on because sin has crept into the world. And a better way we understand and see this is I'm not trying to convey or what I think this text is talking about, but sin actually affects every aspect of our life. That is true, as we'll see later on in verse 8, when God said that sin is crouching at the door, that it's waiting to attack, waiting to affect every single thing about your life. Sin affects our life, and I want to draw a contrast between that question of what do I do when these emotions feel natural? And the best way to answer that is, I just pointed out with that quote, a quote by me, by the way, but a quote that doesn't focus on what we deserve, but actually what God does deserve. And the best way I can describe that is by seeing a sacrifice, seeing what we can offer God. And like I said at the beginning, that offering to God is not just worship, it's not just the sacrificial system, but it's our life. The best way to describe this is through an act of worship. And I don't have to try to allude or illustrate that for you. Genesis 4 gives us that. It gives us a picture of what not to do, and it gives us a picture of what to do. And that's the contrast, that's the comparison I want us to see, is that Cain and Abel were men. They were the first sons. They were first created beings of created beings. And they try to offer up, they try to restore, they try to build this relationship back with God. That's what I think is so cool about them, is that Adam and Eve knew what it was like to walk with God. Cain and Abel are just desiring that. And that's where we can fit in. That's what we can feel. That's what we know, is trying to restore, trying to get back to a relationship right standing with God. Or at least I pray that's your hope. That these two offerings obviously contrast each other. Cain brought the first fruit of the ground. Cain brought fruit of the ground. He brought fruit. It's what in Leviticus calls a ground offering, a grain offering also. In Leviticus, there's no rules or exceptions, this is important, to this offering. It's unlike comparing it to sacrifices or meat offerings, there's no rules or limits or max that you should or should not bring. The people of Israel later on in Leviticus would see this as a free will offering, meaning you give what you want. You give offering based on what you think is deserved. Do y'all see that? That Cain gave a fruit offering, which Moses would later describe as an offering meant to be what you think is to be deserved. What you think, what you're offering to God is what it's worth. What you think who you're offering it to is deserving of what you're giving. The text tells us that Cain gave. Not a lot, but he gave. And you can say the Bible doesn't hide that fact. But it points that he did give. He gave an offering. But I would argue and want to point out too that there's little to no detail about this. And what I'm comparing that to is Abel's offering. Look at verse 2 and 3 again. It says that he gave the first fruits of his flock and the fat portions. Those two titles, that description alone, is more description, is more detail about anything that Cain gave versus what Abel gave. Abel not only just gave the first and the fat portions, but these titles, again, show us what he's actually giving. Within these words, we see more details about what Cain gave. The firstborn of his flock, the strength of his flock, the future of his flock. Abel did not know if he would get another animal. Abel did not know if he was going to get another opportunity to have this type of flock. The results of this is that he worked so hard to raise up this cattle, to give birth to this next cattle, and that's what he gave. It was meant for just more than just a cattle, but it was resources, it was wool, it was future offsprings, it was food. But not only his first, not only the significance of that, but also the fat portions, also the best part of the food, the best part of this animal that was meant for eating. The very first, not knowing if he would get anything else, and the very best, not knowing if he would get this in return again. And we're not just going to spend a whole sermon talking about the offering, but I wanted just to describe, and really better describe from a quote from Richard Hess, is that by giving the firstborn of the best animal, Abel would be understood as giving everything to God. And so in contrast, we see Cain gave something, Abel gave everything. That's the contrast that we see. That's the contrast sometimes as Christians, to those of you who are in the room, that's what the contrast that sometimes we live in. Sometimes we come to church, sometimes we sing songs, sometimes we raise our hands. But we live in this contrast of just giving something versus giving everything. In another plain language, I want us to see that Cain gave something just to keep the relationship. Just to say, hey, this is your gifts because, this is what I'm supposed to do. Girls, if you ever get a gift like that, run. Or Abel, who gave, I'm not just giving this because I think you deserve this, but he's giving this offering because, hey, I value your relationship. I value everything about you. This is something that I know you like. This is something from my heart. This is something I intentionally give, even if it's not just on a special occasion. There's a difference between just giving an offering so you keep the relationship out of just fear of not having the relationship anymore, versus giving something out of value. That's what Abel gave from. Kylan Perry, a pastor in Dallas, says, you can tell a lot about the offerer by the weight of their offering. You can tell a lot about who and what is being given based on what they're offering. Let me ask you this. Based on that quote and based on what we're seeing in this text so far, what are you offering to God? Not what are you going to offer to God, but what are you offering God? What have you offered Him today? What have you offered Him this week? Did you feel too busy to spend time with Him? Did you feel like you just had a wrong attitude and complaining and it was just justified to have that kind of spirit? Did you feel that there was no convenient time to meet with Him? Did you just not read or listen to anything because there was other things going on and it was just busy right now? Have you responded to a problem or even considered praying in a godly way? About next steps, about wisdom, about patience, about understanding, about, as 1 Corinthians says, a way of love that doesn't insist on my own way, or an assumption about the best, or not withholding any, just remembering and only focusing on wrongdoing, that holding no record of wrong. Like this way that 1 Corinthians 13 talks about. Have you done this? Have you offered this to God? Have you responded this way? When we worship, when we pray, when we talk about not just today or this week, but tonight, are our eyes truly focused on Him? Or are we focused on what's around us? Not fully expressing how thankful we are, not singing to the highest standard, not raising our hands, or not offering only our attention on what we're singing and saying and reading. Are you distracted even in these moments right now when we're reading and talking about God's Word? Are you distracted about something else? Are you distracted about something else that's going on around you? Let me say also the opposite of that. Are you only focused on singing loudly or raising your hands or taking the best notes so someone sees you as more eloquent or in the right place? Like, what are you offering to God? Are you offering Him nothing because you're so distracted? Or are you offering Him something so it looks like you have it all together? If either one of those things are true, I would say we fit into that category of Cain. Because often I think we think God is totally being unfair. Maybe you feel like Cain does. Maybe you haven't said those words specifically, but maybe that's how you're living with your life, with your thoughts. with your words, with your attitude. That sometimes we don't actually believe that Romans 8, that He works all things together. That He doesn't have any regard for me. Look at that again in verse 5. He says He regarded, He accepted Abel's offering, but for Cain, He had no regard. I want to talk about that just for a second, which that looks unfair, right? Why wouldn't God just be gracious and polite and accept this offering? That's totally legit. Why did God just push Cain away? He didn't push him away. That regard, that word there is not saying that God rejected Cain right then and there and there was no hope for him anymore. That word is shahah in Hebrew, which means to look forward, to look toward, to pay attention, to be happy with in that moment. So God is just saying, hey Cain, you didn't, this isn't pleasing to me because this isn't your best. And that's okay. He's not looking at him with hatred. He's not looking at him with, hey, you messed up completely. Don't talk to me anymore. No, He's saying, Cain, let me help you. Favor with God, this is Kyle and Pear again. Favor for someone does not mean disfavor for you. So when it says God had no regard for Cain, He's not saying he's not important to him anymore. He's not saying that He's just forgotten about him. He's not saying that His promises are no longer true for him. Instead, He's giving Cain an invitation. And we'll talk about that as we go on. But He's inviting Cain to rethink his heart, reconsider his offering, confess his sin. But Cain does not see that as such. It says that his face falls. And we're seeing in this moment the corruption of sin, deception. Verse 5 again says his face drops. Just like anger and comparison and jealousy, we know that feeling. As point 2 is going to point out to us. We know that feeling of our face dropping. And verse 7 tells us why. That he's being disregarded, he feels like. But Hebrews 12:15 says this, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many will be defiled. Bitterness always starts small. Why them? Why not me? This feels unfair. And that's exactly what's happening to Cain. Instead of asking God, what do you want from me? He starts thinking and believing, God, why did you do that for him and not for me? Comparison grows and anger is bloomed. You know that feeling. You know that feeling of hurt. And like I said at the very beginning, I'm not talking about extreme circumstances that you have a right to be upset about, that you have a right to lament, as Ecclesiastes says. There is a season for that. But I'm talking about the situations in your life that you've just held on to for way too long, that you are not releasing back to God. And that's frustrating. One pastor says this, comparison is a thief of joy because it convinces you someone else's story is better than yours. That God loves them more than He loves you. Verse 7 in the Bible, I think, is arguably one of the most important verses in the Bible that God describes what sin is. Sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you. That is scary. That sin's desire, that this concept of wronging in your life, this concept of being opposite of God, its whole purpose, its whole desire is for you. It's for me. But God says you have power over it. You must rule over it. In other words, sin is waiting for this comparison moment so He can turn it into anger. Anger feels like the proper response. It feels justified. It feels like standing up for yourself. It feels like seeing things in a clear way or making things seem clear and according to your desire. But anger oftentimes shrinks our perspective of what emotion actually is steering us away from. It's sliding away from God's will, as we saw from last week of what sin does. It takes us away from God in His presence. 1 John 3:11 and 12 say this, for the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was the evil one and murdered his brother. Notice what John is doing. He doesn't just say Cain murdered Abel. He's saying don't be like Cain at all. Why? Because Cain's problem is not just about murdering Abel. That is a big problem. But he's also saying that hatred in his heart is why he killed Cain. Or why he killed Abel. Notice that he's having this resentment. He's having this emotional attachment of bitterness and holding on to it. And this whole dialogue between God and Cain happens. And then after that, that's when he kills Abel. It's not this immediate cause and effect that sin, as God described, is crouching at the door, waiting to consume your life. In other words, one of the most clear signs that God is changing our hearts, is changing our desires, is that we seek to honor someone, not to hate them. And hate doesn't just look like killing, as Jesus would say in the New Testament, that hate looks like resentment. Hate looks like an eye roll. Hate looks like not seeing what they're trying to say from their perspective. Hate looks like only insisting on your way. Hate looks like holding on to wrongdoing. Hate looks like everything 1 Corinthians and everything the Bible and the New Testament talks about and the opposite of. The story, obviously, as we've been alluding to, doesn't end there. Cain goes on to kill Abel. And yes, you may be thinking, Austin, like last week, I'm not that bad. I've never killed someone. You may not be capable of killing, and I pray that's everybody not in this room. But the sin has capacity of making your heart kill your love for one another. You may not be a murderer, but sin has that capacity to make your heart hate your brother. Cain didn't immediately become a murderer. His sin developed. It grew. And I want you to examine your life, your relationships. Is there a problem with you and someone else? What makes you easily angry? What problem in your life and circumstances leads you to becoming angry, or I should say? What words or actions come across as hateful to you? Why is jealousy, comparison, and hatred the thing that feels so natural in your life? I believe all these emotions have stemmed from one problem, our lack in trust of God. That God is the one we've talked about. God is the one who cares and is intentional and He loves us. But sometimes we believe He's not actually involved in His creation like we've talked about this entire series. Because if we were the case, we sometimes would even ask the question, why is God not stopping Cain? Why did He not save Abel? But I would say, let's look back in these verses and see that conversation about sin. That third point, this last point, real quick. See this conversation about sin. This compassion that God has. We've rejected God before. That even crossed our mind in reality. That before Cain even killed Abel, what did he do? He questioned. His face grew down. He became angry. These emotions are stirring in Cain. And what does God respond with? Questions. With grace. With compassion. I love the fact that both in Genesis 3 and in Genesis 4, God has this moment of His children, of Cain, Abel, of Adam and Eve. Maybe not Abel, but these people in his life, these people of the world, He sees them sin. He sees their emotions. And He comes to them and says, what's wrong? What happened? What did you do? He begins immediately to ask questions. If you ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting, he's like just asking questions. He's just saying it's not your fault. He's saying these same things over and over and over again, not because he doesn't know the answers, but because he wants us to realize them ourselves. Look at these questions he asked Cain. Why are you angry? Why are you angry? Is it because you didn't get what you thought you deserved? Is it because you don't feel secure in where I've placed you? Is it because someone else is elevated and you feel like because of that you feel unwanted? Is it because you feel everything in your life is just unfair and not what you thought you would be at in this season or this point? Why is your face fallen? This one specifically convicted me this week. Not just why are you angry. Maybe you don't feel like you struggle with anger. But this feeling of being sad, this feeling of being downcast, this feeling of your face being like just fallen, as the word says. Is it because you fear that you'll never be happy? Is it because you always are going to ask the question, how long, God? Is it because you're scared of what reality actually is? Is it because you lack the attentive or the belief that God actually does care, sustain, and help you? Is it because you fear that your prayers aren't going to be answered? The beautiful thing about this picture and these questions is that God, from the very beginning that we've seen in this series, even until now, is the same. He's caring, He's attentive, and He's there loving His creation. Both accounts from the beginning, have had cruel, unhealthy, messed up, broken nature of man being displayed. But God is the same in every single situation so far. In every single situation from here until the rest of time. God does love, God does care, God does have intention for our life. God is coming down not with fire and brimstone and unfair judgment like we're going to talk, and that's not what He's like, but we're going to talk about that question. Like, why does it feel sometimes that this does feel unfair? That God does feel like He's coming down with an iron fist. We're talking about that next time. But right now, I want us to see, as Genesis is displaying for us so far, God's nature first is to come to us with compassion. That's how the Bible starts describing God. If everything from Genesis to Revelation is connected and displaying this one story, its beginning, its origin, is compassion, is understanding, is love, is grace. And that's what Cain missed. Because God may have been like, Cain, I may have not regarded your offering right now, but my mercies are new every morning. I have more grace, I have more regard, I have more acceptance than you can even imagine. I may have not seen your offering as worthy of an offering today, but that doesn't mean tomorrow that will be the same. That doesn't mean that you're actually rejected from me. That doesn't mean that you're cast out forever. Most of us know this familiar feeling of frustration or just fatigue in general. But God is saying again, I have more favor than you can even begin to imagine. Why do you hate your brother? God cares for us. God wants our response to be the same as His. That's why Abel and Cain's offering was there in the first place. He wants that restoration of our relationship with Him. And the most ironic thing about it, and this is the last thing I want us to see, and the most ironic thing about any of this, is that the person who was treated unfairly the most in this whole story is God. Not by an extreme circumstances, but how we've been acting. By how we've sinned against Him. Romans 3 tells us that all have sinned against God. All of us. Not just His brother, not just a friend, not just anyone that we may have anger or resentment towards, but every single human, every single person who has once been created with intention and care and is designed by God. We have sinned against Him when we compare ourselves to someone else. We have sinned against Him when we become angry. We have sinned against Him when we are jealous for something that we don't feel like we deserve to have yet. Romans 3 that says none are righteous. No, not one. Romans 3:11. That means that no one in the beginning, no one in their nature seeks God. All have turned aside. All have gone into wrath. All have sought their own desire. But God's mercy, God's compassion is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that's the will, that's the desire, that's the emotion that we should try to reflect. Not our will, but yours. That this is the desire of God for our life. That we honor Him, not with comparing, not with our emotions. Emotions, again, sometimes feel natural. But that doesn't mean that that's the most honoring, true thing. The most honoring, true thing is God. And what does He say to do? Live for Him. Offer rightly. Come to Him every morning. Regard Him in every situation. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask you to close your Bibles, finish your notes, and begin to bow your head and close your eyes, or whatever you need to do as we begin to just ask these questions. I want us to think about what it means truly to honor God with our life. What is it truly that our emotions are reflecting? What is it truly that is the most natural response to a circumstance? What is the most natural response to something that's happened to us? Is it to just ask questions? Is it to blame? Is it to have this extreme emotion like anger or hatred or jealousy or comparison? What is your situation that you're walking in right now? What is it that you are responding with? And I want us to see also that, again, you, me, your neighbor, everyone that's ever existed has treated God unfairly. Has wronged, has sinned, has alienated us against our relationship with Him. But He is not disregarding us in the sense of rejecting us forever. He's actually doing the opposite. He's sending us an invitation to actually make right again our relationship with Him by sending a better offering than Cain and Abel could ever offer, and that offering is Jesus. That covered multitudes of sin. Every single one of them. That cast them as far as the east is from the west. And not only that, but His mercies, His promises are greater, Ephesians says, than anyone can imagine. It actually says that He is the person who brings justice. He is the one who holds vengeance in His hand. He will make all things right. So trust Him with that. Come to Him seeking restoration for your life, for the wrongdoing that you've committed against Him.